Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Book Buff. Today, we're going to be talking about The Fellowship of the Ring, and this is one of my favorite books of all time. I have the Lord of the Rings tattoo here, the Tree of Gondor, so the whole series is special to me. I started watching the movies when I was like 2 years old, read the books many times through. It's an amazing series. So today, I thought I would kick off this channel with the first book of the series, The Fellowship of the Ring. To start, let's talk about maybe the most contentious thing about the Fellowship of the Ring that I happen to love a lot, and that is scenery. The Fellowship of the Ring has a lot of scenery, and Tolkien spares no expense at describing this scenery. We start out in the Shire, as we all know, this lush green land with rolling hills and trees, and it really puts you in that world of the Shire at the start of the book. You feel like you're in this cozy, warm, earthy area. And Tolkien did this on purpose because when he was growing up, he started growing up in an area much like the Shire in England, but eventually he had to move into the cities, and he came to have a great disdain for industry and machines and smoke and so on and so forth that you see in the cities. And you definitely see this interplay in the books between this almost utopian view of the Shire and something like Isengard that is very busy and machinery and like a city. So Tolkien goes into a lot of detail here with the scenery, and it's really important because it evokes all of these emotions that we feel, myself included, and it's kind of contentious. Some people say it's hard to read because just, shut up about the rolling hills, but I think it's important. It really puts you in the story, and I appreciate it quite a bit. The next important thing that we should talk about is friendship. As many of us know, friendship is one of the main themes in Lord of the Rings, and this is shown literally in the title, The Fellowship of the Ring. We have these 9 companions who all come together from different areas of Middle-earth, different races, different peoples, for this one mission to destroy the ring, and it's really powerful. But let's back up a little bit. Let's start, again, back in the Shire with the hobbits. Our main character, Frodo Baggins, has a couple of hobbit friends that we're all familiar with. Sam Gamgee, Peregrine Took, Meriadoc Brandybuck, Pippin and Merry, and they're all very, very close friends. And I think one of the best displays of friendship in the whole series is in the Fellowship of the Ring. This isn't in the movies, but in the books, Frodo has a very prolonged period of time before he decides to go to Rivendell, and he takes his time to sell his belongings, sell Bag End, and his initial plan is actually to move to Buckland and stay there for a little while before he hightails it to Rivendell and kind of sneak out. But along the way, they come across the Black Riders, him and Sam, and by the time he reaches Buckland, he's like, shit, I have to go. I have to leave the Shire. I have to start this quest because they're already on my tail. And he wants to do this alone, maybe with Sam, but Merry and Pippin, they were prepared for this. They had packed everything, and they were ready to go at the drop of a hat with Frodo on this mission. And Frodo didn't want them to come. Not at first. He wanted to do this mission alone, but they wanted to stick by his side. And this is a theme that we see really throughout this book and all of the books, and that's the power of friendship and sticking by your friends in times of need. Naturally, we see this later on with Sam when Frodo goes off to Mordor by himself, and we see this with Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas looking for Merry and Pippin, and so many examples of it. But sticking by your friends when they need it most, even if they don't expect you and don't necessarily want you, it's powerful. So one of the most important things that a fantasy book should do, in my opinion, is immerse you in the story. It should be like an escape, almost a getaway, like a vacation, and really Tolkien does this better than anyone else. Kind of going back to the whole scenery thing and the descriptions and all the adjectives and whatnot, Tolkien does this better than anyone. When you're reading any of his books, especially The Fellowship of the Ring, in my opinion, you are lost in his world. You are lost in the lore and the characters and the history, and it's really magnificent. For any of you who haven't read The Silmarillion, I would highly recommend it. It is like the Tolkien Bible, if you will. It lays out pretty much all of the lore of Middle-earth and the Lord of the Rings universe, if you will, and it makes a big difference when you read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because there's a lot of stories in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and a lot of mentions and almost Easter eggs if you've read the Silmarillion, because if they bring up Morgoth or Beren and Luthien, you're actually going to know what he's talking about, as opposed to just looking at that and thinking, what is this more fluffy lore stuff that I don't understand? So reading the Silmarillion, highly recommend it. So the last couple things I want to talk about, besides the brilliant storytelling, the immersion, the friendship, and all of that, are some really, really deep moral themes that Tolkien digs into here. Now, Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and this influenced his beliefs and his writing quite a bit. If you've read the Silmarillion, you can really see the tie-ins to Christianity here. We have effectively God, Eru, the One, and he creates all of Middle-earth, and his chosen people, if you will, are men, the race of men. And it's a very interesting thing, and I'll make a video on it at some point, possibly, or just continue to talk about it through these Lord of the Rings series. But it really influences his philosophy in the books, and you really see it shine through. So the first one, and this is a pretty obvious one, is the temptation of power. Power is one of the most tempting things that we face as humans, and Tolkien delivers this idea beautifully with the Ring of Power. The temptation of the Ring of Power is different for every person, which is really key and really important here. I think if you look at someone like Boromir, who is very heavily tempted by the ring, he's tempted by it in a seemingly good way, and the phrase that comes to mind for me is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Boromir wants to use the Ring of Power as a weapon against Mordor to save his family, his kin, and his kingdom, and on face value, this seems like a really noble thing to do. But, as we all know, the Ring of Power corrupts, and it corrupts absolutely, as does power in the real world as well. Now, this is important because we see a good number of characters resist or even wholly discard the Ring of Power as though it has no power over them. The main one obviously being Tom Bombadil, who's not in the movies, but he's an interesting character nonetheless. He is totally unfazed by the Ring of Power. He picks it up, puts it on, doesn't really care, hands it back to Frodo, doesn't faze him whatsoever. And Tom Bombadil's a really interesting character, and in my opinion, he almost represents this idea of Mother Nature, if you will, or nature in its purest form, and it can't be tempted by things of power, because nature in and of itself is good. You know, thinking back to Tolkien's influence from Christianity, when God created the heavens and the earth and so on and so forth, it was all good from the beginning, and it was only man that strayed from this. So if you think of it in that context, I think it makes sense why Tom Bombadil wasn't tempted by the ring, because he's so in tune with nature that he is practically nature, and it would make sense that nature isn't tempted by the One Ring. But we also see other characters who are fazed by it, but they resist it, like Gandalf, Galadriel, Aragorn, and that shows the strength of their character. It shows just how strong they are and how confident they are in their own beliefs, and really how mature they are. It takes a lot of conviction and courage to resist power, but these characters do it, and they are the most powerful and renowned characters in the whole series, if you look at it from that perspective. And I think we can apply this to our own lives as well. When are we tempted by power? Are we tempted to pursue power at the expense of integrity, our family, people around us? What are we willing to sacrifice for power? Because at the end of the day, power is useful. Some people inevitably will need to be in positions of power, but how do we use that power, and who are in those positions of power? It's all explored in The Fellowship of the Ring and further books, and I think thinking of power almost like this seductive, tempting ring, personifying it, making it this material thing, it really does a good job of illustrating how tempting it is and how we should resist it. So Tolkien does a great job here with that idea of power. I could keep going on and on about that, but I think you guys get the general vignette. Now, the final thing here, which again kind of ties into Tolkien's Christianity, is pride versus humility. And C.S. Lewis, his contemporary, talks about this quite a bit. And it's really important, and I think it's really, really good for us to understand. So pride is the chief vice. It's the vice from which all other vices flow, and humility is the chief virtue, at least according to someone like C.S. Lewis. And this is really interesting for us to observe in The Lord of the Rings, and I think the best way to start is by looking at humility. The heroes, the true heroes of this story are the hobbits, and hobbits are the least of us. They're halflings, so they're very small, they don't do any courageous things, they just kind of live their life, and they're a very humble people. colloquially speaking. But more than the colloquial definition of humble is in lowly, they are just humble to begin with. They don't have these grand aspirations of power. In later on in The Return of the King, when Sam wields the ring, he's tempted to be a really good gardener, which is so very humble. And I think Tolkien did this on purpose. He wants the heroes to be people who are just like us, common folk who enjoy the simple pleasures in life, gardening, reading, good food, good beer, these things that we can all kind of relate to. But they are so humble that when the time comes to stand up, they seize it. And if they seize it well and courageously, they don't have much to worry about because they don't have this ego. They don't have this pride that's drawing them down and tearing them down little by little. Compare this with Sauron, the main villain. He is pretty much pride personified. Sauron has this constant need and desire to prop himself up, to command others, and really falls into all of these negative categories of vice that we're all very familiar with. And it doesn't serve him well. He eventually falls because of his pride. He never suspects that anyone would take the Ring of Power and destroy it because his ego is thinking, I am so high and mighty, and this power is so tempting. It must be good. I must have to pursue it, and so would everyone else. No one would ever think of just casting it away to destroy it. Really, Sauron falls by his pride. And the interplay between these two is a very beautiful thing, and Tolkien illustrates it in these books with masterful detail. And it's one thing to understand it in a theoretical sense, reading C.S. Lewis, for instance, but having a story behind it is really powerful and almost more powerful than the theory behind it. I often think of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien as these two sides of the same coin. C.S. Lewis describes the philosophy and the theology behind a lot of these ideas, whereas Tolkien brings them to life. And I love C.S. Lewis, fantastic author, and his ideas are brilliant. However, I don't feel those ideas internalized quite as well as when I read Tolkien. And I think that's really the beauty of Tolkien on a deeper sense. You know, more superficially, it's a very fun read. Like, the story is great, the characters are great, we all know that. But underneath that, the values, the beliefs, the moral decisions that these characters make, they bear out, and they are something that we should all look at and take some advice and take some lessons from. So that's my off-the-cuff review of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. You guys can expect something similar to this for the following two books, as well as C.S. Lewis and more books down the line. So keep an eye out for those. And if you guys have any book recommendations, or you've read Fellowship, or have any ideas of your own, leave that in the comments below. Take care.